Daredevil is one of the most highly praised superhero shows ever made. 7 years have passed since the conclusion of the series in 2018, and with the release of Daredevil Born Again right on the horizon, it's only fair to ask if the original Daredevil has remained one of the best superhero shows ever made. In this video, we're gonna dive deep and see how well Daredevil holds up. We're gonna cover the production of each season, taking a look at what went on behind the scenes and how it impacted the final product. We're going to, of course, dive deep into the story of each season and how well it was executed or not, and we'll look at the reception of each season and see if they still hold up years after they each concluded. So let's travel back in time to 2003 and look at the production of Daredevil Season 1. In 2003, Daredevil, starring Ben Affleck as Matt Murdock and Jennifer Gardner as Elektra, was released in theaters. While the movie grossed $179 million at the box office on a budget of $78 million, the movie was by no means a success for Marvel. Marvel had already begun their next era on the big screen with successes such as X-Men and Spider-Man, so there were hopes that Marvel could keep the success going with Daredevil. But due to lackluster box office returns and poor reviews, Ben Affleck would never return to play the character. 2 years later, there was an attempt to breathe life into this franchise with an Elektra sequel movie, but it ended up doing way worse on every level compared to Daredevil. As a result, The Man Without Fear would be shelved for roughly the next decade. In 2013, Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige announced that Marvel had regained the rights to Daredevil and his associated characters. In the early and mid-2000s, it was common for Marvel to license their characters to other studios, like they did with Spider-Man and the X-Men. With the release of Iron Man in 2008, Marvel had begun producing their projects in studio, not having to worry about licensing away their characters anymore. 2013 was an interesting time for the Marvel Universe. Phase 1 of the MCU had just concluded, with the Avengers being a huge success for the company. The formula of having stories with standalone characters preceding a team-up story proved to be a success. Marvel had hopes of reproducing that on the small screen with the characters known as the Defenders. Initially, screenwriter and director Drew Goddard pitched Daredevil as an R-rated film, but at the time Marvel was not looking to create R-rated projects. While I'm sure Goddard would have loved to have directed a blockbuster version of Daredevil, he was familiar with the character. He knew that Daredevil wasn't a character that should fight alongside the Avengers and saving the world on the big screen. He was quoted saying this: "I went into Marvel and talked to them about making it as a movie a couple of years ago, but what we all sort of realized is that this movie doesn't want to cost $200 million. The thing about Matt Murdock is he's not saving the world, he's just keeping his corner clean, so it'd feel wrong to have spaceships crashing in the middle of the city." So instead of creating a small budget movie, the executives at Marvel agreed to turn Daredevil into a television series. Kevin Feige had plans to use Daredevil in the films, but the execs at Marvel wanted Daredevil to remain on the small screen, preferring the big screen to focus on the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Marvel eventually gave the distribution rights to their streaming universe to Netflix. As a result, shows for Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, and a team-up show The Defenders were pushed into development, again hoping to recreate the success of the Avengers. Initially, Drew Goddard was pleased with the change to make Daredevil a television show instead of a movie. He believed it allowed the story to focus a lot more on the characters and it could stick with the darker tone. But in 2014, Goddard had stepped down as the showrunner for Daredevil. Instead, he wanted to focus his efforts on directing a feature film based on the Sinister Six for Sony, a project that would never end up happening. With Goddard's departure, Stephen S. DeKnight took over as showrunner for the first season of Daredevil. While it was crucial for DeKnight to stay true to the spirit of the source material, Season 1 of Daredevil does not directly adapt any of the comic books. Frank Miller and John Romita Jr.'s 1993 miniseries Devil, The Man Without Fear was the main inspiration for Season 1, but again, it was not a direct adaptation. Principal photography on Daredevil would begin in July 2014. It was given a budget of $56 million for 13 episodes. Given the current Disney Plus model, you'd think that Marvel was only capable of making 6 episodes with $200 million like Secret Invasion. But no, back then Marvel was a lot smarter with how they handled the small screen. Production concluded in December of 2014, and 4 months later, on April 10th, 2015, all 13 episodes of Daredevil Season 1 would be released on Netflix. Netflix, making it the first show in the Defenders saga. Daredevil did not have a crazy production. There were no behind-the-scenes fights or dramas that heavily altered the production. But given the sorry state of streaming these days, it's so interesting looking back at the production of a show where it seems like the main priority was serving the story. How did this all turn out? Well, let's dive deep into the story of Season 1. Season 1 is a masterclass in character development. While the later seasons do a better job at developing multiple characters, Season 1 does a brilliant job at introducing us to Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk. The way the season accomplishes this is by dividing its story into 3 acts. The first is introducing Matt's character in a relatively black and white world. The second act introduces us to Fisk and how that complicates Matt's worldview. And the final act is the climax of these 2 stories where character arcs are resolved. So let's go through these acts and see how they craft each part of this excellent narrative. Act 1 introduces us to Matt Murdock. Right off the bat, the premise of his character is pretty interesting. In day, Matt Murdock fights for justice as a lawyer through the courts, and at night he fights for justice as a vigilante in the streets. There's a lot of conflict that can stem from this. Is Matt a hypocrite for fighting for the law one way while breaking it another way? Boom, you have an interesting premise for a character. But what Daredevil does with the character is give him so many more layers than that. The core of Matt Murdock's character is the struggle of controlling the devil inside of him. Matt's faith is maybe the most defining part of his character. It's his North Star. It's the reason he does what he does. His faith leads him to believe that justice is supposed to be fair. He believes he was put on this earth for a reason. After he was blinded and gained these powers of heightened senses, he says he can use his heightened hearing to hear people's prayers. Matt believes God put him on this earth to help people. It's also the reason why he doesn't kill people. He knows it's wrong because that is a core part of his beliefs. It's a big part of his faith. Everything I've stated here is the angel on Matt's shoulder. When he does what he does, these are all the good reasons why he fights crime at night. The devil on Matt's shoulder is, of course, Daredevil. Deep down, Matt Murdock is a really angry person, whether that be because his mother abandoned him, because his father was murdered, because his mentor Stick abandoned him, or because he's blind. Matt holds a lot of anger. While he often tells himself he fights crime for the greater good of his god, he also partially enjoys the violence. This was one of the themes of the second episode. Matt tells one of the Russians that he likes fighting people. When he later tells Claire that it was a lie, she doesn't entirely believe him. Matt finds catharsis in beating up criminals, but he also feels like it's wrong. He does and doesn't enjoy violence. This often leads to Matt questioning what makes a good person. Is he a good person? In the first episode, the camera lingers for more than 10 seconds while he repeatedly punches the same guy. This is not someone who does what he does solely for justice. He is more than willing to go over the top, as long as he doesn't kill anyone. Does someone committing acts of violence give Matt the right to beat their ass up? Where is that line? Matt often says he wants to end crime in Hell's Kitchen, but does he actually want to do that? Because without criminals, that means he can't fight anyone. Matt's desire to fight doesn't just stem from his anger, however, but also his relationship with his father. Matt idolized his father. He saw that Jack Murdock was gladly willing to take beating after beating to provide for his family. In a way to be like his father, Matt gladly takes beating after beating to serve a larger good, protecting Hell's Kitchen. George R.R. Martin once said that the core of any good story is the human heart in conflict with itself. This is the perfect way to describe Matt Murdock. He is constantly in conflict with his faith and the devil inside of him. Every season of Daredevil explores this essential question. This is potentially a hot take. Daredevil is the best iteration of a character with a no-kill rule, and this includes Batman. Matt Murdock is one of the few instances of this type of character that actually struggles with the temptation of killing people. I know there are a lot of iterations of Batman, including many animated shows that I have not seen, but in the Batman stories that I've seen, Bruce Wayne hasn't struggled with crossing that line. In the Dark Knight trilogy, a trilogy that is widely respected, after Bruce almost kills someone in the first movie, never again does he struggle with this. The tension throughout the rest of the trilogy stems from how he will resolve issues since he can't kill people. The Dark Knight is a battle between Bruce's and Joker's points of view, but never in that movie do I feel like Bruce is even considering killing someone. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, another widely respected show, I never felt like Aang was going to kill Ozai. Everyone was telling Aang that he needed to kill Ozai, but he was pretty set in stone in his beliefs. The tension there stemmed from how he would defeat Ozai, not if he would kill him. Matt Murdock is constantly struggling with wanting to kill people. On multiple occasions, Matt does want to kill Wilson Fisk. He gets to a point where he has his hands around Fisk's head ready to snap his neck, but his faith always wins out in the end and he doesn't cross that line. This is such an excellent way to approach a character, one that, again, is constantly in conflict with himself. As the seasons progress, we start to see how complicated the world of Hell's Kitchen really is. But to begin the series, it's pretty black and white. People like Matt, Claire, Foggy, and Karen are clearly the good guys. These no-named Russians are the bad guys. This was a wise decision from the writers. You have a 13-episode season. You don't need to put all your cards on the table right away. By having the villains of these early episodes be pretty one-dimensional, it allows the story to really focus on developing Matt Murdock. If they introduced Fisk in the first episode and gave him a backstory right away, then the story could have potentially been really crowded. But because we don't really meet Fisk until the 4th episode, the first 3 episodes are mostly entirely about Matt and developing him. The other major strength of these opening episodes is how well it shows how vulnerable Matt is. Throughout the entirety of the series, Matt is constantly injured and almost dies many times. The second episode begins with him needing his life saved by Claire. He gasps and wheezes during fights, showing he doesn't have unlimited endurance. Matt Murdock may have superhuman powers, but he is a human being. Yes, showing Matt and all his injuries after fights makes him more relatable, but the real narrative strength here is by showing the consequences of the devil on his shoulder. My cardinal rule of storytelling is that characters must suffer the consequences of their actions. With Matt, he doesn't get to tap into his darker side without consequences. Every time he does, he is putting his life and his body at risk. When addiction is portrayed in storytelling, a big part of that addiction is the negative consequence that results from it. With Matt, the negative consequence of his addiction is the harm he constantly endures. This makes others fear for him, which is why he wants to keep his identity a secret. So the first act does an excellent job of telling us who Matt Murdock is, what the themes are of the season, and what his internal struggle is. The second act is where the world starts to expand. We meet Wilson Fisk, and right away I want to say I love how they introduced his character. When we meet him, there's nothing menacing about him. He's just looking at art. But the way they handle these opening episodes is by showing how others are so fearful of Fisk. Before we even meet the guy, someone kills themselves so they won't have to face the wrath of Fisk. This is how you show how dangerous a villain is. You don't just tell us, oh, he's an evil dude, you see how others react and how evil he is. And that sets the stage for the threat that he is. A lot of people say the best villains are the ones who believe what they are doing is right. I don't always agree with that, but it surely is one way to make a villain interesting. Where Fisk truly excels as a villain is how he mirrors Matt Murdock. Since this is a 13-episode season, and not one of those garbage-ass 6-episode seasons that the MCU puts out these days, the writers have the time to actually explore these characters. You have the time to devote an entire episode to exploring the villain's backstory. Through this backstory, we see how both Fisk and Matt are largely defined by their father's relationship with violence. Matt was raised to believe he can endure violence for the greater good, while Fisk believes inflicting violence for the greater good. Jack Murdock wanted to make his son proud through violence, while Fisk's dad taught him to inflict violence on others. Both Matt and Fisk's relationship to violence leads both characters to want to help Hell's Kitchen. But of course, Fisk is gladly willing to use violence against anyone to get his way. He uses his power and influence to buy properties, kick out poor people, and work with criminals. Where the two also differ greatly in terms of the relationship with violence is their justification of it. Fisk has no issues hurting or killing other people, while Matt struggles with whether or not he's in the right or wrong. These similarities and differences between these characters leads to the moral ambiguity Matt must face. That is how you develop a villain and the relationship to your protagonist. Matt and Fisk perfectly complement each other, and Fisk perfectly challenges Matt. The other excellent part about the second act of the season is that Matt continues to suffer the consequences of his actions. Being Daredevil doesn't just have a physical toll, it is affecting his personal life as well. Matt learns that others will gladly go after people he cares about to get to him. This is what happens when Claire is captured. Matt begins to struggle with how close he wants people to get to him. He doesn't want Claire to get involved because look at what can happen. His personal life also greatly suffers when Foggy finds out the truth. This episode with Foggy finding out is one of the best episodes of the season. The way the episode contrasts how the two became best friends and their friendship potentially falling apart was heartbreaking. Matt genuinely feels bad for hurting Foggy, but he also wants to keep Foggy safe, which he feels like he was doing by not telling him the truth about Daredevil. Daredevil. This show brought back the importance of a secret identity. Characters in the MCU don't care about secret identities. When you're a billionaire or a super soldier or a Norse god, it doesn't matter if people know who you are. But when you're a normal person who happens to have heightened senses, then there are real concerns with people finding out who you are. Again, this show forces Matt to suffer the consequences of his actions, and I love that. As we approach the end of the season, aka the third act, we start to see this moral battle between Matt and Fisk come to a head. Fisk challenges Matt's worldview. Matt believes the law provides guidance for right and wrong. It's a big part of his religion and part of his beliefs as a lawyer as well. But Fisk has control over that system. Matt also believes that individuals can make change alone, while Fisk firmly believes there must be structural change. Fisk says a city needs to die before it can be reborn. In order to accomplish this, he takes over all the institutions that Matt holds so dearly. Fisk proves that he cannot be beaten directly through the law. So what will Matt do? This is the first time we see Matt really struggle with wanting to kill Fisk. How do you solve a crisis when the only way to do it seems to be betraying everything you believe? Even when they try to defeat Fisk through the press, Urich is killed. Will he listen to the devil and go over the edge, or listen to his North Star and stick to his principles? All season, Matt believed that his friends and loved ones were a liability. By getting involved, they could get hurt, and he doesn't want that. But Foggy helps convince Matt to stick to the law, to defeat Fisk the right way. And it works. Fisk is arrested because of the work Matt and Foggy did through the law. What at first seemed impossible was now possible. Once Fisk is arrested and eventually escapes, it's Daredevil who shows up to defeat Fisk one last time in the season. This was the perfect season finale, and here's why. All season, Matt has struggled with his identity. He's struggled with that inner conflict of crossing that line as Daredevil that he's teetered all season. But in the end, it wasn't Matt alone that defeated Fisk. It wasn't even Daredevil alone that defeated Fisk. It was the both of them. Matt got Fisk arrested through the law, and Daredevil sent Fisk back to the police. Both these sides of Matt, the two that have been in conflict, worked together to defeat Fisk. This is how you resolve the inner conflict of a character. Season 1 of Daredevil was a masterclass in developing characters. It not only introduced us to a complex villain to challenge our hero, but it developed said hero into a multi-dimensional character that audiences can root for. Let's see how audiences viewed this first season of the Netflix Marvel shows. Because Daredevil was a series produced on Netflix, there's no box office number to look at. Netflix also doesn't release viewership data, so there's nothing to look at there either. But you don't need numbers to tell how much of a success Daredevil was. Fans and critics alike adored it. On Rotten Tomatoes, Daredevil Season 1 scored a 99% along with a 93% audience score. Of the 13 seasons of the Defender saga, Daredevil Season 1 has the highest score of all 13 seasons. On IMDb, when you average the scores of all 13 episodes, Season 1 has an average score of 8.71 out of 10. That is excellent for a season of television. The highest rated episode of the season was the season finale Daredevil with a 9.3 out of 10, and the lowest rated episode was the third episode of the season Rabbit in a Snowstorm with an 8.3 out of 10. Daredevil Season 1 was a huge success for Marvel and the Defenders saga. Let's pick back up in 2015 and look at the production of Season 2. The success of Daredevil Season 1 led to Marvel reaffirming their plans for a larger universe. In November of 2015, Jessica Jones Season 1 would release on Netflix, marking it the second of the Defenders shows. When Season 1 of Daredevil was released on April 10th, 2015, there hadn't been any confirmed plans for a Season 2 yet. Stephen DeKnight said there would probably be more seasons, and Netflix COO said Daredevil was eligible for more seasons, but there had not been a confirmation yet. However, because of the huge success of Daredevil, only 11 days after its release on April 21st was Season 2 officially announced. DeKnight announced that he would be departing the series, however. Therefore, Doug Petrie and Marco Ramirez would replace DeKnight as showrunners as well as executive producers. Both served as writers in the first season and worked closely with DeKnight. Since Season 1 was the first season of the Defender saga, Marvel was still unsure if gritty and violent shows like Daredevil would resonate resonate with audiences. But after the huge success of season 1, the new writers of the show had the green light to dive deeper into the darker tones. Ramirez therefore thought season 2 was the perfect time to bring the Punisher and Elektra into Matt Murdock's story. Season 2 would be all about challenging Matt Murdock. Principal photography began in July 2015, shortly after the announcement of the season 3 months prior. Back then, shows actually stuck to their promise of near yearly releases, so it didn't take long for season 2 to come out. On March 18th, 2016, less than a year after the release of season 1, Daredevil season 2 was released. There isn't much to discuss when it comes to the production of season 2. Marvel was efficient. They knew what they wanted, they knew what would benefit the character, and they executed that plan. So let's dive deep into the story of season 2. Season 2 is widely regarded as the weakest of the trilogy of Daredevil seasons, and it's easy to see why, but I refuse to let anyone say Daredevil season 2 is a bad season of television. There is so much this season that Matt goes through, and it allows us to take a look into his character that we didn't get before. There are 4 different conflicts Matt Murdock must face this season, each one vastly different from the other. There's his brief conflict with the Punisher in the opening 4 episodes of the season, there's the conflict with Elektra for the latter 9 episodes of the season, there's his struggles with Foggy and his friends that pretty much span all season, and then there's the battle against the Hand, which does continue on into the Defenders. Let's begin by talking about Matt and Frank, because this is clearly the best part of the season. Matt and Frank couldn't be more polar opposites. While Matt and Fisk had some similarities, Matt and Frank represent complete opposite sides of the topic of murder. Frank and Matt have seen this dark world and they do what they think must be done. Of course, Matt believes in justice and that people deserve chances at redemption. Frank, on the other hand, believes people get what they deserve. Matt doesn't want to inflict the pain of losing a loved one upon others. It's the classic saying, a villain wants to use his pain to hurt others, the hero wants to make sure no one else feels that pain. Frank thinks that people can't change, and the world is better off with them dead rather than them ending up on the streets again recommitting the same crimes. The 3rd episode is where this conflict comes to a head. Frank intensely interrogates Matt on his beliefs. He calls out Matt for his half measures and that he can't get the job done. This does actually cut deep into Matt, because he still has some insecurities about his beliefs. It was only a few episodes ago where he was pondering killing Fisk and resolving that conflict. Matt knows that Frank is right, that killing would resolve most issues, but again it all ties back into Matt's inner conflict. Frank is pulling Matt towards the Daredevil side, the side that revels in violence, but it's Matt's North Star, his faith that makes him believe that murder is wrong. The best hero and villain conflicts to me are not the ones where the villain believes what they are doing is right. It's the ones where the hero and the villain have a deep discussion about their beliefs and how they conflict with each other. And that is what we get with Matt and Frank. Where Frank Castle also excels as a villain is of course the development he gets. He's not a guy that just kills willy-nilly, he has a code. He was deeply broken by what happened to his family, and he only kills someone when he feels they are irredeemable. In these superhero or action movies, you need a scene where the main hero and villain talk to each other. That's how you develop a central conflict. But more often than not, what happens is that the villain just stands there and talks, explaining his or her plan to the hero, when in reality they should be attacking our hero. It's not easy to get our main villain and hero in a situation where they could realistically have a conversation with each other. Daredevil doesn't have that issue. It makes perfect sense why Frank wants to have this conversation with Daredevil. He has no reason to kill Daredevil. He hasn't done anything wrong. Deep down, Frank respects that purity in Matt, the purity that he never got to have. The largest narrative purpose behind Frank's role in the story this season is how it relates to the central question. Are people responsible for their actions given their life situation? Is Frank responsible for all the murders he committed given the trauma he went through? This was the entire argument Foggy and Matt tried to make while Frank was at court. Over the first 4 episodes, we learn Frank is a complex human being, one who is damaged. Is he responsible for the murders given the hell he went through? What would you do if you were in Frank's situation? What's so fascinating about this question is how the case Matt is arguing in court goes against what he actually believes. As Daredevil, Matt believes that you can elevate yourself past your determined environment, that people can change and can be redeemed. Frank, on the other hand, dehumanizes his victims. He sees no redemption in them. Matt has to believe that people can change, that they are not just products of their environment. Look at what he went through. If he doesn't believe that people have good in them, then he himself should just murder people whenever it conveniences him. Look at his backstory. He was abandoned by his mother and his father was murdered. Matt has every reason to be like Frank Castle. But can Matt control the devil within him? He has to believe he can, or else he's just like the villains in this story. Funny enough, when Frank has his outburst at court that eventually loses Matt and Foggy the case, he proves Matt correct. Frank didn't kill criminals because of his trauma or whatever. He wasn't a victim to some mental illness. Frank killed those men because he wanted to. He wanted justice. Frank proved to Matt that he was an individual who made a choice. He was not predetermined to make that choice. So even though Matt strongly disagrees with that choice, at least he knows Frank Castle can change if he wants to. Frank Castle continues the show's streak of excellent villains. He was complex, and he perfectly complemented Matt and the themes of the season. Elektra's role this season is a lot more controversial than Frank Castle's. I certainly have my thoughts on the plot related to Elektra, especially when it comes to the hand, but Elektra herself also perfectly complements Matt and the themes. Elektra is this girl that loves adventure and risk and the thrill, while Matt is the guy trying to keep himself straight, working a job for the greater good. Now, in season 1, I spoke about how Matt has an angel and a devil on his shoulder, one representing Matt Murdock and one representing Daredevil. In this season, the two main women in his life literally manifest as that. Karen is the angel on his shoulder, and Elektra is the devil. Karen likes Matt for who Matt Murdock is. She encourages Matt to be the best version of himself. Elektra, on the other hand, likes the Daredevil side of him, not the lawyer side. All those inner desires of rage and anger and violence are brought out through Elektra. She is like that drug that feels so good, but you know is bad for you. Where Matt really struggles this season is that he feels like the real person inside of him is Daredevil, not Matt Murdock the lawyer. Matt feels like Elektra gets him and makes him feel alive. Elektra challenges Matt and makes him question if he should kill people, like how she did when she brought him Jack's killer. She is clearly not the best for Matt, but he can be himself around her. He doesn't need to act helpless. Matt can open up and talk to Elektra in a way that he can't with anyone else. This is why, despite his apprehension when she first returns, he eventually falls back in love with her. He's in love with someone who gets Daredevil. This angel and devil conflict also manifests itself in where Matt focuses his attention. Karen is a part of the Frank Castle case. Now that Frank is behind bars, Matt can only help out as Matt the lawyer. Therefore, there is nothing for Daredevil to do. On the other hand, Elektra is a part of the conflict against the Hand. This is a society of ninjas. Matt the lawyer can't do anything about this. Only Daredevil can. Now, despite the story's missteps with the Hand, the structure of this conflict is frankly brilliant. Matt is given no choice but to choose one or the other. Will he choose Karen and the Frank Castle case and be Matt Murdock, or will he choose the Elektra and the Hand conflict and be Daredevil? While he does go back and forth, he pretty much ends up choosing Elektra and the Hand. Matt chooses Daredevil. Matt's indulgence in the darkness leads him to pushing away the people he cares about. Now, while Elektra feeds this addiction, this inner darkness in Matt, it's ultimately his religion that stops him from going all the way, that part of him that is Matt Murdock. Now, as I said before, the theme of this season is questioning if people are simply products of their past environments. As we come to learn with Elektra, she was essentially raised to become a killer. Elektra even says as much, that she gets a thrill from killing that she can get nowhere else. But Matt wants to help her because he has no other choice but to believe she can change. Elektra does redeem herself in the end, but Matt loses her. Matt's relationship with Elektra does continue on in the Defenders show, but in a much less satisfying way. In this season, I appreciated her inclusion in the story. She complimented Matt nicely, and the chemistry she had with him was excellent. She forced Matt to choose a side of himself, and Matt chose Daredevil. The other conflict Matt runs into this season is, of course, with his friends. Foggy found out about Daredevil last season, and Karen didn't find out until the end of this season. Matt trying to balance all this, along with his desire to be with Elektra, puts immense strain on his relationships. Again, despite the season's flaws, this part of the season really works because Matt suffers the consequences of his actions. He is forced to choose spending time with Elektra or his other friends, and he chose Elektra. Because of this, Matt comes across as a huge dick to Foggy and Karen. He was the one who forced them to take the Frank Castle case, and now he's not even there to help them out for most of it. At the end of season 2 and the beginning of season 3, Matt reaches his lowest point. Yeah, he saved New York from the Hand, but he lost his law firm, he lost his friends, and he lost his girlfriend while trying to help her. You could argue this is all a result of Matt choosing to be Daredevil. It's so refreshing that we have a hero in this show that is as flawed as Matt. Yeah, we love him in so many ways, but he's a deeply imperfect person. The way he treated Karen and Foggy is not how you treat a friend. He's frankly so lucky that the two of them still decide to be his friend after this season. In the wider scope of Foggy and Karen's arc, Matt kind of abandoning them is crucial to their development. Because Matt is out of the picture for a good portion of the season, Karen and Foggy are forced to grow into their own person, something I'm going to touch on a lot more once we get to season 3. So Matt's dynamic with Frank, Elektra, Foggy, and Karen all work great. But of course, we need to discuss the weakest part of the entire show, and that's the Hand. This shadow ninja organization gets close to no development. What their goals are or their beliefs are, we don't know. Such a big part of this series is how the villains reflect Matt in some way. Fisk, Frank, and Dex, who we'll see in season 3, reflect Matt and his struggle of their respective seasons. With Nobu and the Hand, there's nothing there. We don't know how this directly ties into Matt's story the same way all those other villains did. The mystical element was also a huge flop. It was never really explained. I'm still not sure what the Black Sky really is, and because it never crosses over with Frank's story at all, we're not as interested in it. It's quite rare that the plot related to the main character is less interesting than the plot surrounding the supporting characters, but for a large portion of season 2, this is absolutely the case. When it comes to the storyline, it's important to dive into why there was such a lack of development for Nobu and the Hand. Actor Peter Shinkoda, the actor who played Nobu, has gone public about how Jeff Loeb, the head of Marvel Television at the time, cut his character's origin story because nobody supposedly cares about Asian people or Chinese people.
Jeff Loeb told the writer's room not to write for Nobu and Gal, and this was reiterated many times by many of the writers and showrunners. The showrunners that nobody cares about Chinese people and Asian people.
If this is true, this is disgusting behavior by Loeb. Yes, I can be selfish and say removing development from a villain is a stupid idea, but the blatant racism behind this is frankly disgusting and makes me feel a little uncomfortable criticizing the lack of development for the Hand. It wasn't even the writers who were to blame, just the head executive. So as a result of bigoted decisions, season 2 of Daredevil suffered because their main villains outside of Frank got no development. Looking back at the season as a whole, I think the best parts of this season were the slower moments. Yeah, the action with Frank in the opening episodes was awesome, but the little moments between two characters were a lot more memorable. Whether that be Matt and Karen's intimate moment in episode 4, anytime Karen and Frank open up to each other, or when Matt and Elektra open up to each other. These were clearly the strongest parts of the season. Daredevil season 2 certainly has its highs and it certainly has its lows. Regardless of the lows, Matt Murdock goes through significant character growth this season, development that greatly benefits his entire arc. Do most people agree it's the weakest season of Daredevil? Well, let's cover the reception and find out. Daredevil Season 2 was still a big success for Marvel. Yeah, it wasn't as popular as Season 1, but it continued the momentum that would lead into the Defenders. Season 2 scored an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an 89% audience score. So a drop off from Season 1, but not a big one. Of the 13 seasons of the Defenders saga, Daredevil Season 2 has the 7th highest score of all 13 seasons. Averaging out all the episodes on IMDb gives you an 8.88 out of 10, which is actually higher than Season 1. The highest rated episode was the 3rd episode of the season, New York's Finest, with a 9.4 out of 10, and the lowest rated episode was the 5th episode, Kinbaku, with an 8.2 out of 10. Now, unlike the timeline between Season 1 and 2, a lot would end up happening between seasons 2 and 3. So let's discuss the production of season 3. But before continuing on with the rest of this video, only 19.6% of viewers are subscribed to this channel. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you. Season 3 did not go into development right away. By the time Season 2 concluded, there had only been 3 seasons of the Defender saga. Before Season 3 would come out, there would be 7 more seasons of Marvel on Netflix, including the infamous Defenders season. I was pondering covering the Defenders as a part of this video because it is a chapter of Matt Murdock's story, but I decided against it because it frankly doesn't add much to his story. If you followed my channel for a while now, you would know how much I hated how Star Wars handled The Mandalorian. They gave Mando 2 seasons of his own show, seasons I love by the way, then he showed up in a spin-off show where a major chapter of his story took place, and then they gave him a 3rd season to wrap things up. Daredevil has a similar approach. 2 seasons of his own show, then he shows up in a spin-off show, then it comes back together for a 3rd season. Where these shows differ is that the execution was the exact opposite of each other. In The Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett should have been about Boba Fett, but it wasn't. So So now, to get the full Mandalorian experience, you have to watch another show about another character. With Daredevil, this spin-off show is not one of the seasons of Jessica Jones or Luke Cage. It's the Defenders. This is the team-up show. It should have been a big part of Matt's story, but frankly it wasn't. The main storyline was just as confusing as it was in Daredevil Season 2. None of the major characters have any arcs in the season. It's no story, just plot. And frankly, you could take the ending of Season 2 and draw a logical connection between that and where Matt Murdock is in the beginning of Season 3. If you skipped the Defenders and went straight to Season 3, the only thing you'd be confused about is why people are talking about Matt dying in a building collapse. That's a part of Matt's story, but it's not a crucial part. It's not a part of his development. I'm glad the Defenders ended up panning out this way because Season 3 was not hindered by the Defenders at all. The Mandalorian was not afforded the same luxury. For a while, many fans were growing concerned about Daredevil Season 3. In October 2017, nearly a year and a half after Season 2, it was revealed that Petrie and Ramirez would not be returning as showrunners. Eric Olson would be the new showrunner. This means that all 3 seasons of Daredevil had different showrunners. By the summer of 2018, more than 2 years after the release of Season 2, there had still been no word on Season 3. Fans wondered if the quality of the season was so poor that extensive reshoots were needed. Concerns were soon quelled once it was announced that Season 3 would be airing on October 19th, 2018. It was said that Season 3 would be adapting the Born Again storyline from the comics. This is really interesting considering the reboot that is coming out is literally called Daredevil Born Again. But regardless, after much anticipation, Season 3 finally aired. In hindsight, the reason Daredevil Season 3 came out 2.5 years after Season 2 was probably just because Marvel was focused on making the other Defenders shows. So with that out of the way, let's dive deep into the story of Season 3. Season 3 is one of the best seasons of television I have ever watched. I would honestly put it on the same level as any season of Breaking Bad or even the best seasons of Game of Thrones. Rarely do I watch a story that perfectly weaves in storylines and character arcs into something as tense as this season. What the season does well is develop all these characters and use all of them to add to this feeling of dread that persists for like 8 episodes. At around the halfway point of the season until the end of the season, it feels like our characters have no hope. It feels like those things have gotten so bad for them that they're going to lose. Of course, I know this doesn't happen because our heroes almost always win in the end, but when our heroes constantly take L after L after L, it feels like there's no hope. And there is so much tension that stems from this dread. Before I dive into Matt's story and how he factors into this, I want to take a second to explore some of the other characters. I've largely ignored talking about Karen and Foggy so far, and that's because their arcs progress over all 3 seasons rather than any individual season. While it happens in different ways, both Foggy and Karen's character arcs are really about asserting their own individuality separate from Matt Murdock. Let's begin with Foggy. When we begin the series, Foggy feels like the sidekick to Matt. It was Matt's idea to leave the prestigious law firm to start their own practice. It was Matt's idea to take less money and do work for the greater good. We can tell Foggy was the ambitious one of the two. He is making jokes about passing up financial security for this job, but he still follows Matt anyway. So right from the first few episodes of the series, it feels like Foggy is in Matt's shadow. When Foggy finds out the truth about Daredevil, he is forced to keep it a secret from everyone else, including Karen. He is the one who has to change for the sake of Matt. A lot of these cases the two pick up, it's because Matt suggested they do so. Oftentimes, Foggy looks at Matt like he's crazy, but follows him along anyway. Come season 2, Matt is the one who makes them take the Frank Castle case. Foggy thinks he's insane, but yet again he follows Matt anyway. Where things really start to change for Foggy is during this Frank Castle case. I mentioned this before, but because Matt abandoned Foggy and Karen, Foggy was forced to handle this case largely on his own. Where his arc really starts to change is when he has to give the opening argument for Frank. He keeps saying that it's Matt's job to do that, but when Matt doesn't show up, he spirals initially. But after stumbling, he proved to be quite competent and handled himself quite well. For the first time, he took a step towards being his own person away from Matt. Matt. After this moment, Foggy progressively stands up for himself when Matt is being an asshole. By the end of the season, Foggy grew some self-respect and decided to leave Matt and join the firm with Marcy. He is now his own lawyer. When we enter season 3, Foggy is the protagonist of his own story. And that's a big theme of this season, by the way, that most of these characters are protagonists of their own story. They're not just supporting characters to Matt. In this season, Foggy doesn't just do what Matt says when it comes to taking down Fisk. He has his own ideas and pursued them effectively. Yeah, it was Marcy's idea for Foggy to run as district attorney, but Foggy took that to the next level and had a real chance at winning. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Foggy, however. As I said in the beginning of this section, all the characters take L after L this season. With Foggy, he finds out Fisk got to his family and is now blackmailing them. After he and Matt come up with a plan to have Ray testify, Fisk is able to bribe the jurors and it goes nowhere. But regardless of all of this, Foggy endures. He, along with Matt's faith, is Matt's North Star, the thing I've mentioned all video. Just like he did in season 1, he again consults Matt to go through the law to take down Fisk. He is also the lead cheerleader for Matt not killing Fisk. So even though Foggy is still very supportive of Matt, he's no longer in Matt's shadow. He's supporting Matt as his own person. Foggy's arc throughout the series allowed him to become his own person. So when he teams up again with Matt and starts the new firm, he is no longer Matt's sidekick. He is his own capable lawyer. Karen's story is rather similar. So when we meet Karen, she needs to be rescued by Foggy and Matt. She is the damsel who needs saving from the Russian mob. Because she is in Matt's debt, she agrees to join the firm as their secretary. So as season 1 progresses, we see her begin to take a bit of her own agency. She is the one who goes to Ben Urich to do detective work on taking down Fisk. While this was certainly a progression for her character, she is still going to someone else. She still had to go to Ben Urich for help. Season 2 is where we see her biggest growth. Karen is someone who feels like she is covered in sin. We learn in season 3 that it was her actions that indirectly led to her brother's death. A big reason she was so attracted to joining Matt in season 1 was because he was someone who was able to look past Karen's sins and defend her. All the evidence pointed towards Karen being the one who killed that man, but Matt was able to look past that and he defended her. In season 2, Karen sees a lot of herself in Frank. Frank is clearly someone covered in sin since he's a mass murderer. Because Karen feels the same way, to a much lesser extent, she wants to learn more about him and try and help him prove he's not an evil person. While she absolutely takes agency this season, at the end of the season she is still the damsel who needs to be saved. Season 3 is where she fully comes into her own. She no longer needs to ask Ben Urich for help, she leads her investigation into Fisk. Even at times when she does need saving, like at the church, she was more active in her rescue. She knocked out Dex for one, but she also revealed herself without much hesitation after Dex called out for her, and she helped get the people in the church out of there safely. The peak of her arc has to be when she confronts Fisk. Yeah, her move was incredibly reckless, but for the first time, she didn't consult anyone or ask anyone's permission. She went to Fisk on her own accord. The murder of Wesley was something that weighed on her heavily all series. The episode after that happened, the first thing we see is a dream she has where she fears that Fisk is going to find her. But after an entire series of growth, she takes this part of her that she feels shameful of and uses it as a weapon. She was successfully able to get a rise out of Fisk, and she didn't back down. Even though in hindsight it probably wasn't the best move because she almost got killed for doing that, it was significant growth for the character. By the end of the season, Karen is no longer subservient to anyone. She is an equal partner at Nelson, Murdock, and Paige. Both Karen and Foggy had arcs of truly becoming their own person, and it was remarkable to see. The next person I want to discuss before we move on to Matt is Ray Nadim. I thought his inclusion in the season was excellent. Ray represents the everyday man. He has a family, he has his own insecurities, and he has his own struggles. The main point of the character was to put a face on how Fisk is able to gain so much power. Ray shows the smallest bit of greed and desperation, and it eventually spiraled into devastation. The parallels between him and Matt's father gives him a more personal connection to Matt. In season 1, there was no face to the corrupt systems that Matt had to fight against. Here, Matt sees that Ray is just someone who is a victim of his own pride, just like his father. Ray for once wants his son to see him as a hero. Jack Murdock went against a corrupt deal he made and was killed for it. Ray ends up doing the exact same thing. As we'll get to in a second, Ray's story is also critical to Matt's development. Ray helps Matt remember that people can change, that people can be redeemed, something Matt argued against Frank about so passionately in the second season. Just like every good supporting character, Ray's story ties into the growth of the protagonist, and here it was done so effectively. Let's finally talk about Matt. After the events of The Defenders, Matt is left absolutely broken. He is mentally, physically, and emotionally shattered. He believes his crusades against injustice have failed. It was always a part of his belief that God put him on this earth to help people, but he feels like he has taken beating after beating, and now he has just lost that part of his faith. Because his trust in God is broken, Matt wants his persona of Matt Murdock to die off. As I explained in season 2, it's Matt's faith that was his angel on his shoulder. Now that he wants to remove his faith, he has no reason to keep being Matt Murdock. He can fully embrace being Daredevil. Matt says he will bleed only for himself. He won't do it for God. Throughout pretty much the first half of the season, Matt has tried to remove any connection he still has to Matt Murdock. The only reason he goes back to Foggy, his best friend, is so he can steal his wallet. The tension that stems from Matt's identity crisis is based on whether or not he will fully cross that line. Will Matt Murdock murder someone? Because as much as he wants to deny all the parts of him that are Matt, not murdering someone is 100% Matt. As long as he doesn't kill people, his faith is still a part of him. Matt's faith and his reluctance to murder is tested all season. How willing is he to abandon his faith at his lowest point? What the writers do brilliantly throughout most of the season is mirror Matt with Dex. Dex is basically what Matt would become if he completely abandoned his faith. The season goes through great lengths to show how similar the two characters are. Dex has serious abandonment issues. The crux of his sanity is that he leans on one person as his North Star. Whether that be his therapist, or that girl Julie, or even his job, Dex needs something that keeps him straight. Every bit of structure was taken away from Dex this season. When he's at his lowest point, that is when Fisk comes in and corrupts him. Matt is similar in a way, except instead of a person or a job, his North Star is his faith. Matt was abandoned too when he was younger. Dex is that inner demon of Matt. Matt wishes he can no longer be Matt Murdock. If his wishes become true, then Dex is what he will become. This is why the fight between Matt and Dex is so crucial. Matt firsthand is reminded about the importance of his faith. He literally sees someone wearing the Daredevil costume doing what he could become if he loses his faith, if he loses his North Star. What I absolutely love about Dex's story is how it ties into Fisk. The writers did the legwork to show how someone could truly reach their lowest point like Dex did halfway through the season. And because he was at his lowest point, we see where Fisk thrives. He was able to take advantage of Dex's instability and bend him to his will. This is what makes Fisk such a threatening villain, and it's what makes Dex such a compelling villain. It's now time to discuss what the season is really about, and that is Daredevil vs. Kingpin Round 2. On a very broad level, Season 3 is kind of a repeat of Season 1. Both seasons involve Matt struggling with his identity, both involve Matt questioning the legal system because of Fisk, both involve Matt pondering killing someone, and both end with Matt defeating Fisk and not killing him. Where Season 3 excels is that everything is cranked up to 11. In Season 1, we only saw a glimpse of the power Fisk has. In this season, he begins it in jail, and even though Fisk is a prisoner, he's able to bribe and blackmail cops, federal agents, lawyers, judges, and jurors. Season 1 was about getting this man behind bars, proving that he wasn't above the law. Come Season 3, Fisk has turned every institution of justice into a means of injustice. After learning this, how can Matt stay true to his faith? His endgame in Season 1 was essentially a failure. Fisk proved he is above the law. So what Matt is up against here is much bigger than anything he faced in Season 1. If you thought Matt was pushed to his limits in the first season, you were wrong. Season 3 is where he's pushed to his absolute limits, even getting to the point where he says he will kill Fisk. He's not pondering it anymore. He says he's going to do it. Matt is also given literally every reason to kill Fisk. Killing Fisk is easy and it would resolve all his problems. He also has every reason to abandon his faith. God has given him no reason to continue believing. But when the moment comes, Matt just can't do it. He cannot abandon his faith. His first turn back to the light side happened with Ray Nadeem. Ray was someone who did break bad. Yeah, he was forced to do it, but he still complied. He was complicit in dozens of crimes. But regardless of all of that, he was still able to redeem himself. Through his own morality and righteousness, he turned good again and recorded that video about the truth. He lost his life because of it, but it was a reminder to Matt to keep believing in good. If Matt lost faith in Ray and killed him, then Fisk would have won. But because Ray redeemed himself through his own accord, Matt had the chance to defeat Fisk once and for all. Ray, along with Foggy and Karen, restored Matt's faith as well. Foggy and Karen were able to help through the law to stop Fisk, just like in season 1. Matt's friends also give him the strength to not kill Fisk. In the end, Matt's angels win, not his devil. You don't get to destroy who I am. Matt forgives himself. He has fully restored his faith. He will not become like Dex. He will not abandon who Matt Murdock is. The thematic and narrative climax happen at the same time. The plot comes to a head here because Fisk is finally defeated, and the themes of the season come to a head because Matt, despite all his pain, will not break his faith. It all comes together so perfectly. If season 1 was a masterclass in character development, then season 3 was the masterpiece of character development. It all comes together so nicely, and everything pays off perfectly. Let's wrap up the video by looking at the reception of season 3. Daredevil Season 3 scored a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an 86% audience score. Of the 13 seasons of the Defender saga, Daredevil Season 3 has the second highest score of all 13 seasons. Averaging out all the episodes on IMDb will give you an 8.93 out of 10, which makes it the highest rated season of Daredevil according to IMDb. The highest rated episode was the 4th episode of the season, Blindsided, with a 9.5 out of 10, and the lowest rated episode was the opening episode of the season, Resurrection, with an 8.2 out of 10. So is Daredevil the best superhero show ever made? It absolutely belongs in that conversation. Season 3 is one of the best seasons of TV I have ever seen, and the first 2 seasons are excellent as well. All we can do is hope that Daredevil Born Again lives up to these expectations. What do you think about Daredevil 7 years later? Let me know down below. Tune in next week where we'll cover Dune Part 2 1 year later. So stay tuned for that. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to unite the Claude Squad, and I'll see you guys next time.